And we are live! Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the bigger picture! We've got our live virtual studio audience, our fantastic crowd over here on Zoom, and it is wonderful to have so many of you here for the last in the mini-series of Parashat Lech Lecha, the fourth week that we have been exploring this fascinating parasha, seeing so many cool things. And tonight, as you can see from the title screen, which has come up, excellent, we are going to be looking at Yishmael and the Jews. Before we get to anything that we get to tonight, let me just check. Thumbs up in the air if you can see the slides and you can see me. I have pinned myself in advance. That's great. Also, just one word to all those who are watching this on Bushy Shawl Plus One, or watching it on Catch Up, or watching it on Dave. I don't know where you're catching it tonight, but whoever's watching it not live, if you have questions, and there's a very strong chance that you will, then please do be in touch with any of your questions. And if there's a lot of you with questions, then we can always organize a separate Q&A to deal with tonight's topic. Viewer discretion is advised. Here we go, guys. We're going to start with a recap of everything that we've been seeing in Parshas Lech Lecha, just so that we know that we're all on the same page. There are 7 parts, essentially, to this parasha, so unmute yourselves and let me know, what was the first part? Audience participation is essential.
Lech Lecha.
Lech Lecha! Boom! There, that was part 1. Abraham is finally spoken to by Hashem and is told to follow him wherever he may lead him, and he leads him to Eretz Canaan. That's right, so that is Lech Lecha. And the next part?
Going down to Egypt.
The descent into Egypt. No sooner does he get to the land of Canaan than he is told to go down to the land of Egypt. Who's with him, by the way? He's got his wife Sarah, and he has got Lot with him. And Lot, we said, is the spiritual ancestor of Mashiach. So he goes down into Egypt, and he has his encounter there with Paro, and then he comes back up again. And that's when Avraham and Lot end up splitting. And because they are now separated, the next part of the story is
4 kings.
the 4 kings. Lot gets captured. Avraham has to go in and save Lot. And we talked about how the War of the 4 Kings is the microcosm of all of Jewish history and the 4 different exiles that the Jewish people are going to have to go through. And then the 5th part is the covenant between the parts. Remember, you had to walk through these different animals, which also represents the exiles, and that demonstrates to him that not only is he going to have children, but those children are going to inherit the land of Israel. And then we come to our last 2 parts of the story. Hagar and Yishmael, which we are finally going to get to tonight and to talk about tonight. And of course, the second covenant, Brit Milah, as well. So we are going to be picking up the story and discussing Avraham and Yishmael. And we said it's very, very strange, because straight after being told that he is going to have a child and that the child is going to inherit Eretz Yisrael, we then don't go on to talk about the birth of that child. We go on to talk about the birth of Yishmael. And we ask the question, why is Yishmael born and not Yitzchak? And we said that even Avraham was sensitive to this, because when he realized that Yitzchak was really going to be the true lineage, the true inheritor of his line, he asks for Yishmael to be given life to, and Hashem says, well, you know what? Yishmael is going to be a nation. He's going to be a big nation, but Yitzchak is the one who's going to inherit the lineage and the land of Israel ultimately. And so, well, when we ask the question, why did Yishmael have to be born? Why couldn't we go straight to Yitzchak? We mentioned how it must be that there's a necessary reason, that the birth of Yishmael was a necessary prerequisite to Yitzchak's birth. Yitzchak can't be born until and unless Yishmael had been born. And so to understand the answer of why it was necessary for Yishmael to come first, and then to be able to have the purity of the lineage carry on through Yitzchak, we actually introduced a new concept, a very Kabbalistic concept, and we introduced the 7 Sfirot, the 7 Midot, which were the created traits of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through which he interacts and guides the world. And we said that this is relevant to us because it's the same midot, it's the same things that we have within ourselves that we have to learn how to channel and that we have to learn how to control. And they are the midot, the ways of interacting through which we are able to feel the presence of Hashem in the world. And we said that there are 7 midot, and we said that there are 7 individuals, and these 7 individuals embody the different midot. So we said that Avraham represents Chesed. We said that Yitzchak represents Gevurah. We haven't gone into a lot of detail about what these different midot are. We did go into detail about Chesed and why that is Avraham. But fundamentally, what we were trying to achieve with this whole Kabbalistic exploration was to understand that when we say that Avraham embodied Chesed, what we really wanted to say was that Avraham is Chesed, and that the unfolding of his life, everything that we see, all of the details about Avraham were unfolding the Midah of Chesed and injecting it into the spiritual DNA of the Jewish people. And we said we would try to understand what Chesed is. And we used words like altruism, and we used words like benevolence and giving and hospitality and all these kinds of things. And we had a problem with that, didn't we, if you remember? Because we had this verse in the book of Vayikra, in Parsha Achrimot, which talks about the forbidden relationships. And we saw this verse talking about a man who is intimate with his sister, in which the verse uses the word chesed. And we said, well, that can't be what chesed means then, because that is definitely not good. That is definitely not altruistic and selfless and all the rest of it. So we made our definition of chesed much broader than that. And we said that chesed really means to go beyond our boundaries. And we said that that can be positive and that can be expressed negatively. We said that if it's positive, it can be things like volunteering and loving kindness and altruism and giving and hospitality and all of the things that we knew Avraham was capable of. But we also said that there were negative sides. And the negative sides were arayot, right? The forbidden relationships, the promiscuous and licentious activities. We said that it covers things like theft, because you go into someone else's boundary and you take something back into yours. It doesn't belong to you, but you bring it into within your boundaries. And we talked about trespassing, how somebody can literally go onto the property of another, and that is going beyond your boundaries. So these are all negative expressions of chesed. So we said that when chesed is extreme and unbalanced, then it can be negative. Right? And that was the point, that it can be positive and it can be negative. And we said that chesed needs limits, because if you're always going beyond your boundaries, you need to rein it in. And gevurah is the counter to the chesed. Gevurah is about staying within your boundaries. And that also has positive expressions and negative expressions. And we'll come to that when we get into Yitzchak and Vayera. But when you've got the balance, when you've got the synthesis, then things are functioning properly. Fine, very good. So we said if Avraham is chesed, then contained within him is all of chesed, both positive and negative. He had the koach, the opportunity, the ability to only express the positive sides of chesed, and that's why he was such a super duper guy, right? But contained within him was the negative potential, or the potential for negative, the negative expression of chesed, because he was the embodiment of all of chesed. So we asked the question, why did he produce Yishmael before Yitzchak? And we said the reason was that Yishmael was there to draw out the negative expressions of chesed, the potential for negative expressions of chesed, so that it didn't become part of the Jewish national identity. So the negative parts of chesed were extracted out of the DNA, so to speak, the spiritual DNA, and that meant that it didn't get passed on to Yitzchak. Yitzchak received the positive expressions of chesed from Avraham, and the negative expressions went over to Yishmael. So you'll remember the analogy of the pearl, that we sifted through generations, we sifted through the sand until we got our pearl, but there were still things that had to be extracted. Those negative things went to Yishmael, the positive things went to Yitzchak. And if that's the case, then we have more work to do to understand all of this. We talked about Hagar, his mother. Hagar the Egyptian is the means by which we extract the negative expression of chesed, right? She is the mother. She is the one that extracts that spiritual DNA from Avraham, and it becomes part of the national identity of Bnei Yishmael. And that, friends, is where we got to last time. Do we have any questions or comments on any of the recap before we delve into tonight? Because it is a long night and it is a long shir, so it's good for us to try and clear any residue before we get into it. I'm not seeing any hands, and I'm not seeing anyone unmute themselves. Henry!
I find it difficult to accept that Avraham is the personification of chesed, yet he is prepared to throw his child Yishmael out into the desert with his mother.
So let's go into the topic tonight and see how your view changes as we go along, if it changes at all. Yeah, because we are going to talk a lot about Yishmael, and as I said, it's long. There's a lot of sources that we're going to see, so I'm going to try and keep us all up to speed. And it's a challenging topic, guys. Not going to sugarcoat it. It's a challenging topic, and it's a charged topic to look at Yishmael throughout history. We're going to start with looking at Sukkim. We're going to start by looking at verses, and we're going to see in action the negative expressions of chesed coming through Yishmael. We're going to see that in the verses. The lack of boundaries that we've been talking about with regards to the negative expressions of chesed. And then we're going to go through the sources. We'll see the verses, we'll see the Gemarot from the Talmud, we'll see the Midrashim, and we're going to see how it follows through. We're going to start with him as an individual, and we're also going to look at the Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim angle. Right? There's Yishmael as an individual, and there's a Yishmael for everything that he represents throughout all of human history. So we're going to go through it. We're going to try and go through it carefully and sensitively, and go through it together. Are we ready? Yay! All right, excellent. So, as Henry was more or less alluding to, before Yishmael is even born, Sarah throws Hagar out of the house, right? And an angel is the one who has to come along and tell her to go back. You are going to have a child. It's going to be difficult for you, but you have to go back into the house. But in that interaction, when the angel is talking to Hagar, there's an important thing that we have to see. All right, and that's going to take us to our first source over here. Okay, the way in which the angel defines the child, defines Yishmael. So over here in chapter 16, verse 11, you can see it on the screen, or you can have a look in your own versions of Tanakh or Chumash. Says the verse, "Vayomer la malach Hashem," and an angel of Hashem said to her, "Hinach hara v'yoladat bein." Behold, you will conceive and you will give birth to a son. V'karas shema Yishmael, and you will call him Yishmael. Ki shama Hashem el anyech, for Hashem has heard your prayer. Straight off the bat, what we will notice in this verse is that it's an occasion on which Hashem, or one of his emissaries, is naming the child. She's not going to have a say in the matter. Abraham's not going to have a say in the matter. Before she's even giving birth to this child, she is being told what the name is going to be. Do you know who else this is true of? Another example of someone who has the name given before the birth?
Isaac.
Very good. Right? So we have to keep all of this in mind, and we have to maintain this balance throughout. Right? We're being told the name of the child before the birth itself, as we are with Yitzchak as well. Let's have a look at the next verse 12. V'hu yihyeh pere Adam. He is going to be a wild guy, a wild ass of a man. V'hu yihyeh pered Adam. He's going to have no boundaries and he's going to have no self-restraint. And this is being described before the birth has even taken place. Yado bakol v'yad kol bo. His hand is in everyone else's stuff and everyone else is in his stuff. No boundaries. Now, this Pere Adam, I just want to sit on this for just a second. There's a very interesting nuance to pick up with this. All right, and the commentaries, the Mefarshim, they pick up on this as well. In Hebrew, when you want to talk about, for example, you want to say good boy. Okay, good boy. So it should be that the boy is the noun and the tov, the good, is the adjective, right? When we say good boy, we go adjective, noun. That's how we say it in English. Good boy, adjective, noun. When we speak in Hebrew and we say good boy, we would say yeled tov. The noun first, then the adjective. That's the way that Hebrew grammar will typically work. So what does it tell us that the angel is calling him a pere Adam? He's calling him an adjective noun, which isn't the way that Hebrew works. So say the Mefarshim, not only are we saying that he's a wild person, but that his whole essence is going to be wild. Pere is the noun. Adam is the adjective. Yeled tov, noun, adjective. Pere Adam is also noun, adjective. The essence of this person, Yishmael, is pere, is the wildness, is the lack of boundaries. And as an adjective, he's also going to be a man as well. Okay, so it's important that we pick up on that nuance as well. Yado v'kol v'yad kol bo. There's going to be no boundaries, no borders. Ve'al pnei kol echav yishkon. And over all his brothers he shall dwell. Again, this is going to be an individual without any boundaries because it's all negative expressions of chesed. And this is how the angel is defining him before he's even born. Which leads us to an obvious question. Guys, what's the obvious question?
Why?
Why? Good, that's one obvious question. But there's another obvious question which people always love to jump onto with this, which is, what about free will? Right, the angel is defining this person as being negative expressions of chesed. He's going to be all over the place. He's going to be wild. He's basically doomed, isn't he?
But isn't Hashem leading this now? It's not. There's no free will in this.
Why not? Why? Well, that should be a problem for us because we always talk about how people have free will. Yeah. So it's important that we also state a couple of things over here, because yes. Will he have natural inclinations towards these things? Yes, he will. Will this be the area in which he would have to struggle and work to be able to fight these natural inclinations? Yes, but that's the same for all of us, right? We all have certain natural inclinations, but the negative ones, we're supposed to spend our lives trying to break them. You know, the Jewish people are called a stiff-necked people. So we can ask the same question over there. You know, kashay oref hu. The Jewish people are stiff-necked. But all that means is that it would be our natural inclination to be stiff-necked and to be stubborn in that kind of way. But our goal and our aim is to try and break that natural inclination. So when we are talking about Yishmael, we have to appreciate that this definition, as it were, that the angel is giving us is defining the challenge for Yishmael as an individual and also for his descendants as a national identity. They will have these natural inclinations, but they also have the power to overcome them. And that's an important thing to mention, right? They may choose to embrace that identity, but that is a choice, and that is not a destiny. If they don't break these inclinations, then that's the way that things are going to go. So that's what the angel is telling us over here, that without any conscious effort, Yishmael is going to be a Pere Adam, is going to have his hand in anything. There's not going to be any borders, and there's not going to be any boundaries. So that's important for us to appreciate. It's not that there's no free will. In fact, it's the opposite. It's telling us what he is going to have to be challenged on, what he would have to fight against, because those are his natural inclinations, in the same way that we all have natural inclinations which we have to fight against. All right. So,
Nick, if I can say something here,
please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm really sorry because you're in full flow. Sorry, but in the translation of the Tanakh which I've got here, it says, verse 12, "He will be a free man among men. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he will take his place in the face of all his brothers." So, I think it's slightly different from what you are saying.
Well, I've got Art Scroll over here, so what have you got?
More Jewish.
On three, hold up your version. 1, 2, 3.
This is Samuel Hirsch.
Samuel Hirsch, okay.
Samuel Hirsch, yeah.
And what do you feel then is different about what he's saying? That free man means what?
A free man means he can do what he wants in that sense because he has no boundaries around him, which is basically what you are saying. But I think the angel is saying something different. I think he is. He will be a free man among men, so it means he can do whatever he likes, but he will pay the consequences of that because everybody will be against him too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hopefully it doesn't contradict. I don't think it contradicts too much of what we're saying. But thematically, I think we're coming to similar approaches to this. Whether it's as a consequence or whether it's as a accumulation, this is the reality that he will face. These are the inclinations that he is going to have. Okay, so Linda's got a hand. Oh gosh, my screen is something on my screen is covering your face, so I didn't see your hands. I'm sorry.
Didn't Yishmael do teshuvah anyway? Because later on he was with Abraham when they went up to do the Akedah, and so he hadn't been flung out completely. So he did have free will in that respect, but he'd come back.
So that's an interesting point as well. But what we're going to see here is obviously the depth and complexities of his character. So yeah, stay tuned for more of him in Parshat Vayera. So let's take a look. Let's take a look a little bit about this expression of Yishmael's choice, and let's continue even by having a look at what happens when he gets older and he's got a career to choose. So Parshat Vayera, chapter 21, verse 20 tells us, Vayehi Elohim et hanar, vayigdal vayeshev bamidbar vayehi rove kashat. What career does he choose? Says the Torah, he becomes an accomplished archer. Why is this significant for us? Because the whole purpose of an archer, the whole point of an archer is about shooting beyond your boundary. You take your arrow, which is around you, and you shoot it beyond your boundary. And you could even argue that the purpose of an archer is to shoot these weapons in a destructive way. And so we see from here an expression of this lack of boundaries, this negative expression of chesed, coming through as a clear part of his identity. right? And that's what we see in our verses. When the Torah is talking about Yishmael, we are seeing from here what's emerging is this negative expression of chesed, going beyond the boundaries. But it's not just the verses that we're going to see. We're going to see Chazal as well. And they're going to fill in more of the picture, and we're going to see that it's all drawing from the same roots and showing the deeper connection between Yishmael and this extreme distorted chesed. So let's take a look at the next. Oh, there you go. Let's take a look at the next source. All right, source number 3 is a famous midrash. It's famous because I've heard of it, but it might be famous because some of you have heard of it as well. And it's the famous story, as it were, about Hashem going around to all of the different nations and offering them the Torah. And each one of them says, can you tell me what's inside the Torah? And Hashem names one of the mitzvot, which goes completely against the national identity of those nations and other religions as well. And he comes to the Bnei Yishmael, and the Midrash tells us, Halach lo lemidbar Paran etzel Bnei Yishmael. That he goes to the wilderness of Paran, to the Bnei Yishmael. And he says, Amar lahem mekablim atem Torah. Would you like to receive the Torah? Amru lo ma ketiv ba. What's written in it? They say to him. Amar lahem lo tignos. It says in the Torah, do not steal. Amru lo hi Yerushat Avinu. Their response is, but that's our forefathers' inheritance. That's exactly what he's trained us in. Yad b'chol v'yad kol bo. That's what we saw in our verse a minute ago. That his hand is going to be in everyone else, and their hands are going to be in us. Ein anu yecholim l'chiyot b'lohi. We can't live without the ability to steal, and so they do not accept. They do not accept the Torah. So stealing is a part of their national essence and national identity, and for that reason, with this midrash, what's emerging is that they are unable to accept the Torah for that reason. That is who they are, the Bnei Yishmael, right? And then the continuation of the midrash, Balo etzel Yisrael, that he comes to Yisrael, asks them if they will accept the Torah. Amru lo hin, of course, yes, sure. Kol asher diber Hashem naseh v'nishma. Everything that Hashem says we will do, and we will listen. So there is a chazal, a piece of chazal, a piece of midrash that brings out this expression of the negative and distorted chesed. All right. Now there have been other expressions of negative chesed that we've talked about, and one of them is arayot, right? The licentious and forbidden relationships, and that brings us to another famous Gemara. It's famous because I've heard of it, and it's a Gemara that talks about different characteristics, for want of a better word, that have been allocated and apportioned to the world. So, for example, it says that there were 10 portions of wisdom that were given to the world. 9 portions of that wisdom went to Yisrael, and the other portion went to the rest of the world. It says that there were 10 portions of beauty that were brought to the world. 9 portions of that beauty went to Yerushalayim, which is why it's such a beautiful city, and the other 10th went to the rest of the world. 10 portions of wealth came to the world. 9 portions went to Rome, went to the Western world, and the other 10th goes to the rest of the world. And then, this might be the favorite for some people, it says that 10 portions of conversation were apportioned to the world. 9/10 were given to, the Gemara says that 9/10 were given to women, and the other 10th was given to the men. Right? If you don't believe me, Ketubot 49a. But here's the one that we want to focus on for just a second. Yud kabim, asara kabim zanut, 9 portions of licentiousness, yardu la'olam, came down to the world. Tisha natla aravia, 9/10 of this licentiousness was taken by Arabia, and the rest of the world got the rest of it, which is an incredible thing. 9 measures of zanut, says the Talmud, say Chazal, went to Bnei Yishmael, and 1 measure was taken by the rest of the world. Why is this? It's the same thing that we've been trying to draw out and the same thing that we've been trying to express, which is that Yishmael is the embodiment of unbalanced and extreme negative chesed. And we ask the question, how do you even draw out this negative expression from Avraham? Oh, what's just happened? Have I just lost my slideshow? No, there it is. How do you draw out the negative expressions from Avraham? We said that was Hagar HaMitzrit, the Egyptian woman Hagar. She is somehow the mechanism that is able to draw out these negative expressions from Hagar. Why is this significant? What do we know about Hagar? We don't know very much, but we do know that Hagar was Egyptian, right? And that should tell us a lot from things that we've been learning about in previous shiurim, taking us back to Parshat Noach, right? Bnei Cham, the descendants of Cham, were Cush, Mitzrayim, Ufut, Uchnan. Mitzrayim is descended from Cham. Cham was the son of Noach, who brought through some of the pre-flood mentality, right? I'm hoping that we remember having touched upon some of this stuff when we did Parshat Noach. But Cham was bringing through. So we talked about last week, I think, that the flood had occurred because of a distortion in chesed, right? That people were stealing, people were engaging in inappropriate behavior and inappropriate relationships, and so the flood waters had to come and compensate for that. So Cham is the one who brought some of that mentality into the world after the flood. Chazal told us that he had relations while he was in the ark, even though that was forbidden. He had some kind of inappropriate interaction with Noach when he came out of the ark, and that led to his curse. And Mitzrayim is descended from Cham. But not only is Mitzrayim descended from Cham, but they are the most potent expression of this arayot, of these inappropriate expressions of relationship, right? And so we see over here in the next source, after that, at the beginning of the, I think I've got the source wrong. No, I do, I've got it right. Okay, so the beginning of the inappropriate relationships in chapter 18 of Vayikra, right? Chapter 18 of Vayikra is where we saw that verse about a brother and a sister, but there's a whole list of forbidden relationships. We read it on Yom Kippur, and we read it on Parshat Achrimot. So, Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe lemor, Hashem said to Moses, saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleihem ani Hashem Elokeichem, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord your God. K'ma'aseh eretz Mitzrayim, asher yeshavtem ba, lo ta'asu. Don't be like the Egyptians. I'm going to give you this whole list of things that you can't do. Why do they sound familiar? Because it's what was going on in Egypt. Don't do it. Mitzrayim was this expression of these forbidden relationships, of these arayot. They embodied these arayot, and it was a big problem in Egypt. So why is this significant? Because in our parsha, Avraham is having a child with none other than Hagar, who is Egyptian. And these negative distortions are appealing to her. They are attractive to her because she comes from a nation which embodies these particular tendencies. Okay, so why does Yishmael get these traits? It's because Hagar, the Egyptian, is the one who is drawing all of these attractive qualities, which produces this distorted chesed, which embodies Yishmael. So we asked the question, why does Yishmael have to come first? And we answered because the negative expressions had to come out before Yitzchak gets the positive expressions of chesed. Why is it that that comes through Hagar? Because Hagar comes as a descendant of Mitzrayim, and as a Mitzri, she is drawn towards these traits, and so she is the one that extracts these negative expressions of chesed and passes them through to Yishmael. So it's hard-hitting stuff. It's not easy to listen to all of this, but irrespective of what we may think of everything that we've heard, there's still food for thought. We're not going to crack everything tonight necessarily. There has to still be a lot of processing for everything that we're hearing. But irrespective of all of that, we can probably all agree that in some way, shape, or form we experience this in our own lives. Right? The people that we surround ourselves with will bring out different parts of our inner being. We all have different friends which bring out different sides of our personality. We might have a friend who I feel particularly comfortable to talk about this topic with, but then when I'm with this other friend, so we just like to chill and just like to have fun and just have a laugh. Things don't get too serious. So different people that we are around, different people that we connect to in different ways express different parts of our personalities. So I think universally speaking, that's a concept that we can at least latch onto and can at least comprehend. And that's why we have to choose our friends and we have to choose our spouses extremely carefully, because if we surround ourselves with the right people, then it will ignite within us the right parts of our character. And if, God forbid, we choose the wrong people and we get into toxic relationships, then it can bring out parts of us which are extremely negative and extremely unwelcome. So Avraham connects to Hagar. And on this level of connection, she's able to draw out of Avraham, who didn't express these negative expressions of chesed. She draws them out, and that produces Yishmael. And Yishmael is the embodiment of negative chesed, which we see through different parts of his life, and the verses that we saw in the Torah, which support this idea of Yishmael being the embodiment of negative chesed. So much so that who does Yishmael end up marrying, or given to him to marry? Right? Chapter 21, verse 21. Vayeshev b'midbar Paran. He lived in the desert, in the wilderness of Paran, which we saw, by the way, a minute ago in the Midrash. Vatikach lo imo isha me'eretz Mitzrayim. And his mother deemed it fitting that his best shidduch, his best chances for finding the right chemistry, was going to be with another woman from Mitzrayim. He bonds well with the same elements of arayot and negative extreme chesed, and that is why his most fitting shidduch and his wife comes from someone from Mitzrayim. Do we have comments or questions before we continue?
Can I say, you wouldn't expect him to bond with any other type of person, because that's his experience, isn't it?
Okay. I think the Torah is taking us deeper than that, though. I do appreciate what you're saying, but I think there's a level of depth there that the Torah is bringing out, which is supported in numerous instances.
Does,
yeah, go on, Joy.
Just going back a tiny bit. I understand that the negative chesed comes from Abraham, and that's how it's drawn out. But does he not give any good, any of the positive chesed to Yishmael? It seems. I just like to know.
He may have done, given him some good. I mean, that would be the logical conclusion to make. He must have picked up some good things. But talking thematically here, I think the emphasis is that he is the one who is drawing out the negative expressions, to allow for the positive expressions to be channeled through the Bnei Yitzchak, as it were. He was obviously not a terrible guy the entire time, because as Linda was mentioning before, he does come along for the journey to the Akedah. So there must have been positive elements to his character as well. But for the sake of understanding the broader context and the bigger picture, the focus or the narrative of the verses and the way in which it's expressed in Chazal all seems to highlight the negative attributes, the negative expressions as well. And that's important because we've up until now been talking about Yishmael as an individual, but we've also now got to tap that in and join the dots and patch that into the national Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim. And Joy, you make a good point. As we said, this was the essence of him that he had to grapple with. So there will have been occasions, I'm sure, where he could have done the right thing, but that is the essence of who Yishmael was. And now we're going to take a look at the Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, the way in which we almost prophetically understand our struggle throughout history with the Bnei Yishmael for all generations, based on this idea of Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, the actions of our ancestors being a sign and a signal for things to come throughout history. So let's prepare ourselves, guys. It will get a bit uncomfortable at times, but we're going to see the sources. We're going to see what is out there. We're going to come with an open mind, and we're going to see what the Torah and what the statements of Chazal have to say about the complex relationship between Bnei Yisrael and Bnei Yishmael. So how do these parashiyot set the stage for our interactions throughout history? Bnei Yishmael and Bnei Yisrael. So to get there, we're going to start at the end, naturally. The final part of Lech Lecha. Okay, chapter 17, if you want to follow inside, where Abraham is given this covenant. Right, he's told that he's going to inherit the land, he's going to have children, the children are going to inherit Eretz Yisrael, but there is a condition, and the condition is that Abraham has to live up to the covenant, live up to the Brit. Which Brit are we talking about? Which mitzvah does he get? So he gets the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. When a child is 8 days old, that's when you get your bris. Continues the Torah, a bit further down the page. Verse 23, then Abraham took his son Yishmael and all the servants in his household, right? And he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin on that very day. How old was Abraham? Abraham was 99 years old. How old was Yishmael? Yishmael was 13 years old. Has Yitzchak been born yet? No, Yitzchak has not yet been born. When Yitzchak is born, he'll be the first child to be circumcised at 8 days old. But here we are with the presentation of the mitzvah, right? The covenant through which Abraham is guaranteed to inherit the land of Israel. And it's going to be a mitzvah given to him and given to his children. And in that context, he's promising to inherit the land. But what we have to appreciate, and this is the starting point of the conversation of the national discovery of Bnei Yishmael, that we can see here, explicitly in the Torah, both Abraham and Yishmael fulfill the mitzvah of Brit Milah, of circumcision, 100%. And they continue it to this very day. And we know that Bnei Yishmael continue the concept of a Brit Milah to this very day. They have a connection to Brit Milah, to circumcision. It cannot be refuted and it cannot be denied. Right? But what it would then imply, dear friends, is that both Bnei Yisrael and Bnei Yishmael have a connection to Eretz Yisrael and a claim to inherit Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, because they've been promised. If you cling to this Brit, then you have the claim to inherit Eretz Yisrael. And now we can see why this is already a very charged subject, can't we? Right? So we have a source in the Torah that we are told of this covenant and the promise to inherit, and that will immediately alert us to how complicated it's going to become, because both Avraham performs for himself and for his descendants, and so does Yishmael. So the root of the historical struggle between Bnei Yisrael and the Bnei Yishmael over Eretz Yisrael originates in this very parasha, because both maintain a commitment and a connection to Brit Milah, and they both have a connection to Eretz Yisrael, which means that we have to understand this, because we know that nowadays this is played out, and they have claims to the land, including the holiest part of the land, to Har HaBayit, to the Temple Mount. And so we have to understand why the connection to Eretz Yisrael is contingent on circumcision in the first place. What do they even have to do with each other? And so for us to really begin to grapple with that, we have to understand what the essence of Eretz Yisrael is all about. We have to go to the center of Eretz Yisrael and see what's going on. And we have to understand that at the center of Eretz Yisrael is Yerushalayim. And at the center of Yerushalayim is the Beit HaMikdash. And at the center of the Beit HaMikdash is... We're heading in there now. Where are we going?
Mishkan.
Inside all of that, the innermost part of the Beit HaMikdash
is the place where Isaac was circumcised.
The place where the place where the Akedah happened, right?
Yeah,
but what is that room in in the Beit HaMikdash? The centerpiece of everything is the Holy of Holies. And inside the Holy of Holies is the Golden Ark, and on top of the Golden Ark is the Kruvim. So, at the centerpiece of everything that Eretz Yisrael is all about, the center of Jerusalem, the center of the Beit HaMikdash, the center of the Holy of Holies, the holiest place in the entire world, that's what you see. The Golden Ark, and on top of the Golden Ark are Kruvim. And that's the centerpiece of everything, and it defines the core and the root of everything that Eretz Yisrael is all about. So, now we have to ask, what are the Kruvim all about? This is the centerpiece of everything. So what are the Kruvim, these figures, all about? So Chazal make an incredible comparison. The Gemara in Bava Batra 99a. And they say that how are these Kruvim standing? So it's a discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One says that they were two figurines who were facing each other. One represents Hashem and one represents the Jewish people. And one opinion says that they are facing each other, and one opinion says that they are turned away from each other. And the Gemara resolves this disagreement with the following proposition, that when Bnei Yisrael performed the will of Hashem and they were doing things the way Hashem expected, then they would turn and face each other in this loving embrace. And when they did not, so then a miracle would happen, and they would change directions and be facing away. But here's the crux of it. At the center of all reality is the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. And that's not only the center of all reality, but it's the center of the entire universe. Which means that the central question of all reality is, are we facing Hashem and trying to have a relationship with Him or not? That's the central question of everything. Is there a relationship of love and giving to each other at the heart of reality or not? This is such a fundamental question that my rabbi, who teaches this material, Rav Amos, he said it so strongly. He said that if you don't see reality in this way, then we miss out on the core of Kol HaTorah Kula, the entire Torah, and Kol Ha'olam Kula. We miss out on the purpose and meaning of the entire world. We miss the point of reality. If this is the center of creation, then this is the core of everything. Which means that everything in life and everything in the Torah is an extension of this core. Are we engaging in a relationship of love, of giving to Hashem, of having a relationship with Hashem, or not? All of reality boils down to this ahava. We talked about ahava last week in Lunch and Learn. The giving relationship of love, the loving relationship of giving, whichever we go around. But the point is that as we get closer to the center of the world, to the center of reality, the more intense this becomes. The more intense this becomes. So the closer you get to the center of reality, the more sensitivity there is to deviations from this ahava, to this relationship of love and giving. As we get closer to this point, that exact physical location in the world, there are higher demands. And there are higher demands with regards to the purity of love and relationship. And it's amazing because what it means really is that Eretz Yisrael, with all of this sensitivity, has a very short patience, short tolerance when this capacity of love is misused. And if you misuse it as a way to gratify yourself and to selfishly take from people for yourself, then you are destroying the Brit that guarantees Eretz Yisrael. You're taking the capacity for love and connection and using it for the exact opposite. And instead of focusing on others, you're focusing on yourself and giving yourself what you want and indulging in what you want. And that's what it means to forego this covenant of Eretz Yisrael. And that's what the Torah is trying to drive at towards the end of that same parasha that we've been talking about. In Parashat Acharei Mot, when we're talking about the forbidden relationships, and we go through the whole list, and at the end of that list, verses 24 through 30, the Torah tells us, Al titamu b'chol eileh, don't be contaminated with all of these forbidden relationships. Ki b'chol eileh nitmeu hagoyim, because this is the way that other nations have contaminated themselves. Asher ani mishaleach mipneichem, that I expel before you. So there were these other nations living on the land of Canaan, on the land of Israel, which contaminated themselves with these forbidden relationships, and they were expelled to allow for the Jewish people to be able to live there. Continues the Torah, the land became contaminated, and I recalled its iniquity, and the land disgorged its inhabitants. Vataki haaretz et yoshveha, the land vomited out its inhabitants. Very strange lashon, that when there is contamination at the level of these relationships, Eretz Yisrael, because of its sensitivity, because of its propensity for holiness, Vataki haaretz et yoshveha, it vomits out the unwelcome inhabitants. Very specific. Ushmartem atem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai, you shall guard my decrees, my judgment. V'lo ta'asu mikol ha'toevot ha'eleh, and you shall not commit any of these abominations. Ki et kol ha'toevot ha'el asu anshe ha'aretz asher lifneichem v'titma ha'aretz, because the people who lived before you committed these abominations, and the land became contaminated. V'lo taki ha'aretz etchem b'tama'achem ota ka'asher ka'a et hagoy asher lifneichem, don't let the land vomit you out because you've gone and contaminated in this way. It's very deliberate and very, very strong language and very specific that the land will vomit out like it has to other nations. What is this language of vataki, of vomiting out? So we would think that it means it's a punishment, but really the Torah is telling us it's a cause and effect. In the same way that when we eat bad food, right, our bodies want to process the food that we eat, but it's incompatible. So we have a reflex. And our reflex of the body is to expel and to reject the food because it cannot coexist within our bodies. So our body has to just expel it. So the Torah doesn't say that the land is going to throw you out like it's some kind of punishment. There is some kind of cause and effect. The land cannot tolerate that kind of incompatibility with what the land is really all about. Eretz Yisrael ultimately is a land of love and of giving. And if we misuse that capacity and we use it for lust and we use it to take, then it's incompatible. And so the land of Israel, with the kruvim, with the relationship, loving relationship, giving relationship, representing Hashem and the Jewish people, right at the center, the physical reaction is that the land, and history plays to this, that the land will vomit out that incompatibility. So what that tells us is that the land is extremely spiritually sensitive to distortions of this kind on the level of love and relationship. And that is why Eretz Yisrael is contingent on Brit Milah, on the circumcision. Because Brit Milah is a covenant where we take our connective capacity on the deepest, most intimate of levels. Right? It's with that member, with that part of the body through which the deepest, most intimate relationships can take place. And we dedicate, as a nation, as Jews, we dedicate that we are going to use that part of our body for Kedusha, for holiness, to connect in a way of Kedusha, of giving and of love, and not to misuse that part of the body for personal gratification or lust. And the fact that both Abraham and Yishmael perform Brit Milah means that they both in some way understand and connect at this level. Now, there's not many sources that talk about Yishmael's relationship to Brit Milah and to Eretz Yisrael. But the ones that we are going to see, I think will really, really hit home quite intensely. There's a Zohar. So for all you Sfardim out there, David, got my eyes on you. Your face will light up. Right? The Zohar, Kabbalah, says about Yishmael. Okay, this is taken from Parshat Va'era, so much later on into the book of Shemot already. But the Zohar is lamenting the fact that Yishmael was born and that Yishmael has this connection to Brit Milah because it does mean something. Says the Zohar, Vai al hahu zina de'is yelid Yishmael ba'alma ve'is kazar. Woe to the fact that Yishmael was born and was given bris milah. Ma avad kudshabrichu. But what did Hashem do? Archik lehu livnei Yishmael midveikuta dil'ela. He cut off Yishmael's connection on high, meaning that he's not going to be rewarded in the same way that we will for our connection to bris milah. But in compensation, v'yahav lehu chulaka latata ba'ar kadisha. But he has given him a portion of the Holy Land in the world below. Begin hahu gezir debahon, because of the fact that he has bris milah. Uzminin b'nei Yishmael lemishlat ba'ar kadisha. And in the future, Zohar is an old text. It's scary how prophetic this is. There will be a time in the future where B'nai Yishmael will have rulership over the Holy Land. Kad'ihi rekanya mikola. But their milah is somehow flawed. It's somehow lacking. It's somehow rake. Zimna sagi kama digazir de lohon berekanya belosh shlimin. Just like their Brit Milah is lacking and incomplete. Just like their Brit Milah is lacking and incomplete, so too will their rulership of the land be lacking and incomplete. And therefore, the Yisrael from settling in the land, ad de ishtalim hahu zechusa de b'nei Yisrael, zechusa de b'nei Yishmael, because of their merit of the mitzvah of bris milah. So it won't last forever. that they have rulership over the land, but it will be there, and it will be tied to the fact that they have this concept of bris milah in their psyche, in their essence, in their flow of their national history. It's amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. But it's flawed. It's rake. It's empty. It's incomplete. It's deficient. And we see an expression of this in the story of Vayera, in the story of the Akedah, which we'll come to in greater depth when we do the series on Parashat Vayera. But for now, let's have a look at chapter 22. Right? He gets his 10th and final test, where he says, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Yitzchak, and go to the land of Moriah, where you're going to bring him up as an offering. Says the Torah, Vayashkem Avraham baboker vayachavosh et chamoro. He gets up very early, he harnesses his donkey, Vayikach et shnei na'arav ito, and he takes his two children, his two sons, he takes his two na'arav, right, which is Eliezer and Yishmael, Veit Yitzchak beno, and takes his son, Yitzchak, and they go on their way. Says the Torah, verse 4. Bayom HaShlishi, and it's on the third day, Vayisa Avraham et einav, and Avraham lifts up his eyes, Vayar et hamakom merafok, and he sees the place from afar. He sees the place from a distance. In verse 5, he says, Vayom Avraham el na'arav, he says to Eliezer and he says to Yishmael, Shvu lachem po im hachamor, stay here with the donkey, va'ani v'hana'ar nelcha adko, and me and Yitzchak are going to continue on. V'nishtachave v'nashuva aleichem. We're going to do what we need to do, and then we're going to come back to you. So the questions that get asked on this piece, is, what did Avraham see? He was told to go to a mountain, so he knew there was going to be a mountain. So what's the Torah telling us that he is seeing? And who are the people that he's leaving behind? And why is he leaving them behind? Why do they not get to go up with him? So Rashi tells us these answers, and he quotes a midrash, which I'm going to show to you now. Says the midrash, talking about the third day in when he sees the mountain, what does he see? La'achar shlosha yamim ra'a anan kashur al gav hahar. He sees a cloud connected to the mountain. Amar lo bani. He says to Yitzchak, he says, my son, ro'eh ata ma shani ro'eh. Do you see what I'm seeing? And Yitzchak says, yes, there's a cloud on top of the mountain. So he says to Yishmael and to Eliezer, do you see anything? And they say, no, we see a mountain. What's all the fuss about? So this is the point at which Avraham realizes that Yishmael and Eliezer, by extension, but in the main Yishmael, he's got a connection to the story, but he doesn't have a complete relationship. He doesn't have the complete picture, because he is not able to see what Yitzchak is able to see, which is a cloud, which seems to be a cloud that only Avraham and Yitzchak can actually see. Yishmael doesn't see it, and because Yishmael doesn't see it, he says, well, you've got to stay here. You're not gonna come along for the rest of this journey. So Yishmael has a connection, but he doesn't have as deep a connection as Yitzchak does. He doesn't see the depth of the reality of what Makom HaMikdash, where they were going to, Har HaMoriah, that is the Temple Mount. The place, as we were identifying before, the place where the Akedah takes place is the same physical location as what later becomes the Holy of Holies. So they're approaching the Temple Mount. Avraham and Yitzchak can see what that place is actually about, what it's loaded, the meaning and essence that it's loaded with, but Yishmael can't see it. He doesn't have a connection to the deeper level of reality that Avraham and Yitzchak can see. Their connection to Brit Milah is on a physical level only. Why? Because their source comes from the chesed of Avraham, so they have that connection. But it's also coming from Mitzrayim, and it's also coming from Cham, from Hagar HaMitzrit, and that is the extreme and unbalanced distortion of chesed, which is linked inherently with arayot, with theft, with a complete lack of boundaries, And so it focuses on the self. And so they have the Brit, but it's external, and it's rake, and it's empty of the same depth that it has for Bnei Yitzchak. So they have a connection, and they have dominance, control over Eretz Yisrael, but it's eventually going to give way to the true keepers of Brit Milah, to the people who are truly dedicated to a reality of proper giving and ahava, which is the Jewish people. And so that is why, as we've gone through history, we'll all be familiar that there have been descendants of Yishmael who fight over the land that is not theirs, and that there are issues to do with theft, and there are issues even to do with arayot. And while we might think to ourselves for just a second, hang on a minute, I look at some of the descendants of Bnei Yishmael, and I see people who are way more tzniut, they're way more modest in their physical appearance than elements of Bnei Yisrael. But in other ways, they also betray the true nature of this in its most extreme form, because what is the destiny for someone who commits to a decision to blow themselves up, which, by the way, is a complete and total release of all boundaries, right, and destroys everything around them. But the destiny for someone that does that in that culture is Olam Haba, which is a realm of physical relationships. So it defines the struggle, but not who they have to be. It defines the struggle, but it's not who they have to be. But it stems from a distortion of chesed. And even at their finest, so to speak, in that regard, their holiest, the holiest thing that they can achieve is a reality of what we would call arayot, inappropriate physical relationships. I want to share with you one final midrash, which is from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which was written around the 8th century. And it's so prophetic that it gives rise to dispute as to whether it was written later on. And you'll see why when we get to it, because it is so on point and so on target that it's scary. And it talks about the interactions with Yishmael and Bnei Yisrael at the end of days. 8th century. It's a long, long time ago. So what did Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer say in its midrash thousands of years ago? It's picking up on a verse that was said by Bilam. Bilam says, "Alas, woe, oi, mi yichyeh mishmoel. Alas, who shall live when God establishes him?" Got a low battery. Let's hurry up. So Bilam turns to Balak before going home, and he gives a vision about the end of days and the interaction with different nations throughout history, and it's very cryptic. But he says, "Woe to he who lives, who is given the name El." Aleph Lamed. Who is given the name El. And the Midrash is explaining this. Amar Bilam, Mishivim l'shonot shebaraha kadosh baruch hu ba'olamo, lo sham shmo le'echad mehem ela liYisrael, hoil v'hishva hakadosh baruch hu shemo shel Yisrael lishmo shel Yisrael. Of the 70 nations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in the world, he didn't put his name on any of them except for Yisrael. Aleph Lamed gets the name of God in its name. But there's one exception, one other nation. Who is that? Yishmael. They also have the name of God in their name. Woe is he who has to live in the days of Yishmael. Continues Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. A quote from none other than Rabbi Yishmael. Coincidence? Perhaps not. Omer, Chamisha Asad Dvarim Atidin B'nei Yishmael La'asot Ba'aretz Ba'acharit Hayamim. There are 15 things that are going to happen in the land of Israel at the hands of Yishmael, and these are they. We're not going to see all of them, But let's see a few of them, the ones that stand out the most. Says Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer at the end of days. Yamudu haaretz b'chavalim. They will measure the land with ropes. They will measure out the land. Perhaps an allusion to the need to divide up the land. Vayasu beit hakvarot lemirbat sonash patot. They will turn Jewish graveyards into trash heaps and dumps, which is exactly what played out come 1967. What else? V'yarbe hasheker v'ganez ha'emet. Falsehood will multiply and truth will be hidden. Truth will be lost. Said thousands of years ago. V'tarbe avonot b'Yisrael. Sins will be multiplied in Israel. V'kamel hanayar v'hakumas. Contracts and documents will be completely disregarded. The historical facts on which everything is known becomes completely called into question and called into disrepute. Oh, come on, guys. Continues this prophecy. V'yitu galot pardesim v'gadru prutzot chamot beit hamikdash. They will plant gardens and parks and fence in the broken walls of the temple. And the final thing, v'yibanu binyan b'hichal. They will build a building on the makom hamikdash, which we certainly know to be the case today. And then it concludes with another statement, continuing on with Rabbi Yishmael. V'od haya Rabbi Yishmael omer. Rabbi Yishmael also said, Shlosha milchamot shel mehuma atidin b'nei Yishmael la'asot ba'aretz ba'acharit hayamim. There are going to be 3 wars of chaos at the end of days. Continuing in the bold, in the Hebrew, V'achat b'krach hagadol shehu kaved mishnehem. The third one is going to be a war against Rome, a war against Edom, a war against the Western world. And from that, Umisham ben David yitzmach v'yireh ba'avdan shel elu va'elu umisham yavol la'eretz Yisrael. Incredible things. From there will emerge the son of David, the Mashiach. He shall flourish, see the destruction of everybody else around him, and then Yisrael, or the Jews, will come back to Eretz Yisrael. So, either way, guys, however you want to read into the words of this source, either way, please God, we should see an end to all wars and all conflict and see the coming of Mashiach. And let us say Amen. And let us end it there for the recording for tonight. Obviously, we're going to have our Q&A here on Zoom, but to all those watching on YouTube and on Facebook and wherever else you are getting this, we're going to thank you all so much for joining us. And just a little plug for our brand new series on Parashat Vayera, which at the moment is scheduled to start in January 2022, January the 10th, in which we'll be looking at Yitzchak and putting your life on the line. We'll be looking again at these midot, chesed, gevurah. We'll be looking at the origins of conflict with the Plishtim as well. It all gets fun. It all continues to turn up the voltage as we get into Parashat Vayera. So I do hope you'll be able to join us for that. In the meantime, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful night. And please do join us on Zoom for the after party. But for now, signing off and see you all again